Welcome to the Set to Lead podcast, the online mentoring platform for emerging and current leaders. My name is Marianne Samdi, leadership coach and talent development expert, and I will be your host.
Get anonymous feedback on the overall performance of your remote team or your individual virtual leaders using a simple-to-use, cost-effective, and mobile-friendly online team assessment. Learn more at www.settolead.com.
Welcome, Caroline. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being a part of the show. Today's session is about small business recruitment, and I hope together we can delve into the recruiting tasks and endeavors for small business owners and nonprofits. Before we get started, would you mind giving the audience just a little history on your background?
Sure. Well, I'm an executive search recruiter. I've worked on the agency side for the past 15 years. I started in recruiting in 2010, and if you will remember, the economy was in complete shambles. So I came into the office as a candidate looking for a job, and they said, "Why don't you come work for us?" So I started calling on HR professionals, business owners, hiring managers, talking about their recruiting hiring needs. And they were hanging up the phone on me, yelling at me, cussing me out. And I was seriously considering, am I doing with my life? But I made a successful temporary placement within my first 30 days, and the rest is history. And so I've recruited for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, up to Fortune 500 businesses. And now I typically work in the C-suite space, recruiting executives.
Awesome. I mean, they were so unprofessional that they cussed you out?
Yes, that's a true story.
How did you react to that?
I was considering, what am I doing with my life? I didn't know I've never had that kind of thing happen to me, but they were so upset because the economy was so down and they were having to let go of their employees. It just was a frustrating conversation for them, and that's how they dealt with it.
Yeah, it's just amazing some of the things you find in the workplace that you wouldn't expect.
From a business leader.
Exactly. I mean, when stuff like that has happened to me as well, and I'm so jarred and taken aback. Like, what is going on here? What happened to professionalism?
Yes. Yes.
So, with that said, how should small business owners and nonprofit leaders tailor their recruitment strategies to align with their goals and challenges associated with the different stages of the organization's growth, right? So you've spoken about you have a lot of different experiences. You work with larger organizations, you work with small organizations, but the growth cycle changes, right? So maybe first you're a startup, then you're a mature company, then you're a large scale company. Are there different considerations you should make, as far as recruitment for each cycle of growth?
Yes, 1,000,000%. I think that especially as a small business owner and nonprofit, they typically start small, so under 5 employees. And so when they are going into a search and they need to hire and add to their team, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is really sitting down and thinking about what type of person do you need? And what I mean by that is from a skill set standpoint. So you do need a marketing person. Do you need a finance person? Do you need an HR person? Do you need an assistant? And so really getting into it, because a lot of times small business owners will say, I need someone who can do marketing and manage my calendar and work with our CPA. And that person doesn't exist most likely. So think about what your biggest pain point is and what type of person can help you for your next hire. And to add to that, once you really understand and know what type of person and skill sets you need to fill your seat, is writing down a specific job description with expectations. So in addition to the day-to-day job duties, your expectations of what you want to see from them.
So with a company that's under 5 employees, basically a startup, if you're looking for a person that can do multiple things, how do you accommodate for that? Are there how do you look for someone like that? Yes, you have the job description. And so in that job description, you're going to put, I need you to be an assistant and a CFO. Is that
Right.
realistic?
No, that is not whatsoever. But you can hire individuals that have multiple skill sets. And that's why I'm a huge fan of skills-based hiring rather than experience-based hiring.
Right.
Because do I expect you to do CPA work if you're an admin? No, that's not going to happen. But if you're an admin, you can learn additional skills like how to manage the social media account or how to deal with customer service or those types of things. And so I think it's important when hiring, knowing exactly what you need, the pain points that need to be filled first, and then look for someone who can be nimble and who is willing to take on additional duties and learn new skill sets.
So in that particular scenario, for a smaller organization that's first starting, they need to stretch their dollar and get, as much as they can for their buck or so. Does that owner need to also consider that I'm hiring somebody new that I want that has multiple skills? Like you said, maybe it's someone who has administrative background, but they're willing to learn. But doesn't that put a lot of onus on the owner to teach them these new skills?
It does, and it will take time off their plate in the beginning to train them. But once they're trained and set up for success, it will be a huge return on investment.
Should they be concerned that once they train them, that person will leave because now they have more skills than they did before they got hired?
In my opinion, I don't think so. And my experience, what I've seen when business owners invest in their employees with their time and teach them new skills, employees are more excited to continue to learn and develop and use those skills at that company that's decided to take a risk on them. So there's more loyalty there.
So we talked about the startup. Let's talk about mid-level growth and high-level growth. Are there any specific challenges that they should be thinking about when it comes to recruitment?
With the mid to larger size companies, I see a huge area of an opportunity with job titling. So, what I mean
Mm-hmm.
by that is, are you hiring an assistant marketing person or a marketing manager or a director? And sometimes the titles can crisscross and overflow in that. And so, really understanding the hierarchy of what type of person you're looking for when you're hiring and building out those larger teams.
Now, how I've worked in small companies, big companies, and large companies, and I found that it's very hard sometimes for that recruitment person to really figure out what the hiring manager wants. Are there tips on how to probe the hiring manager to make sure you understand the job titling well? Like, even if maybe the job title isn't appropriate, but how do you make sure that the job description fits for what that hiring manager wants? Are there tips?
That's a great question. And I'm so excited that you asked that because, from an HR or talent acquisition standpoint, when you are going into a search and working with a hiring manager on a specific need, I think sitting down with them and really understanding what they need from a hard skill and a soft skill standpoint. So, for this next person who you recruit and hire to be set up for success, both buckets have to be full. They need to have the actual skill sets, the hard skills to be successful in the position, but they also need to have the soft skills so that they can fit in well with the team, um, grow the team if it's a manager position. And so both of those have to be are crucial.
They really are. And I haven't been in a lot of situations where I feel that like that due diligence is had.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore what happens is that, the hiring manager is recruiting people that are really not suited. It just makes the interview process so much longer because the candidates that are in the pipe are not the right fit.
Mm-hmm. Yep, 1,000,000%.
Yeah. So diversity and inclusion is an essential part of any organization, whether you're small or big. Are there any practical steps on the recruitment side that a smaller organization can take to foster a diverse workforce and inclusive workplace?
Diversity and inclusion is absolutely essential in any organization, and you can achieve that by recruiting from different communities and on different platforms. So what I mean by that is not always looking for to hire somebody that looks the same or is the same or thinks the same as everyone else within the organization, but to be open-minded into, adding to that mix within the organization. Candidates want that. They want to log on to your company website and see diversity and inclusion.
Mm.
Um, and I would encourage to get creative when you're recruiting. So using LinkedIn, posting the job, you can even use Twitter, can plug into certain communities. You can go to specific groups. And so just casting a wide net there so that you can include that piece.
And so does that mean at the start of your recruitment process, maybe you identify certain groups and communities that you always tap into when you're looking for an open position?
Yeah, I would encourage you to recruit from groups that you have not plugged into before and ask for referrals or offer a referral fee bonus. Um, because, or if you have, candidates who have those skills, ask who they know and offer them referral bonuses as well.
Before we move on, right? I want to stay here just for another moment. When you think about D&I, what are some examples of diverse groups and communities people should be leveraging?
You can go into specific groups within LinkedIn or Facebook, and advertise your jobs there so that those can be seen by those from individuals in those communities. And
Mhm.
maybe if they're not actively looking, they know somebody that is, and they can refer it that way. It's a safer space to go into to advertise your job, um, than rather just blasting out to the world and hoping that you're going to get that type of candidate apply.
So I think where I'm trying to go with this is that, in your experience in working with various companies, are people just, defining diversity and inclusion in terms of race, or are there other types of inclusive communities that you should be reaching out to? Just so people get an idea of what that makeup should look like when they are looking to have a more diverse pool of applicants.
I think that diversity and inclusion absolutely has to do with race. It comes to do with gender. It has to do with, you can even include individuals' disabilities in that.
Hmm.
It has several different buckets and faucets to it, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah, and I agree. And I just wanted the community, the audience to know that, that there's a pretty broad spectrum, broad spectrum of what we mean when we say diversity and inclusion.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you for that. Remote work is also hot in the last several years, right? How can small business and nonprofits leverage the trend in their recruitment strategies when it comes to remote work, and what challenges might they face?
So the good news with remote work is it really opens up a larger talent pool. So you can find someone across the country who maybe is your perfect fit, or maybe, they're one state away or whatnot. It makes the talent pool so much wider, and you have so many more choices when you offer the remote work scenario. I'm a huge advocate of the remote work, or at least flex schedule. Almost every candidate I speak to these days, they want that. They don't want to be mandated to go back into the office. And so if you have the opportunity to offer that to your employees, thumbs up to you. Some of the challenges that I've seen in the remote work scenario is, number one, staying connected. So staying connected to your employees, having a tap on, do they need help or additional training, or are they doing okay? Or are they happy here? And then also number two, the accountability piece, keeping them accountable for what they're supposed to be doing, keeping them on task, and also making sure they feel a part of the organization and not isolated.
What are your thoughts when it comes to some of the salary considerations when you're dealing with a remote worker? Being that you have a lot of experience in this, do you see that it's more cost effective for an organization to go for a remote worker, or there is no difference between on-site and remote as far as it pertains to salary?
I think it's much more cost effective because you just need to provide them the equipment so that they can be set up for success in doing their jobs. You don't have to pay the commercial office space or have the leasing of the offices and the supplies and all of that. So it
Mhm.
opens up so much more opportunity for from a cash flow standpoint and from a headcount standpoint.
Do you see the trend of employers going more towards remote workers, or are you slightly seeing everybody wanting to go on site? I know a lot of the larger organizations are doing hybrid and on site, but I'm wondering what are you seeing from where you stand?
I've seen a mix. So I've seen companies really embrace it and thrive and more impactful to their bottom line. And then I've seen the companies that have pulled back and have mandated that employees come back in the office. And the majority of candidates I speak to day in and day out, they don't want to be mandated to come back to the office. Do they miss the office environment? Some do, but some don't miss the commute anymore. They need to stay home for their families, and they can still get their job done. They just aren't going to a physical office. So I see it trending that the companies that can offer the remote or flexible schedule are getting top tier candidates.
Oh, really? Top tier. And how are you defining top tier?
So the candidates that are the most skilled or are the best at their jobs and whatever that looks like. So it could be the best receptionist or the best accountant or marketing professional. The ones that are really thriving in their jobs and in their industries, those are the ones who gravitate towards the remote work and flex environments.
Recruiting is expensive, and I guess that's subjective. But I
Mm.
was wondering in this competitive job market, how can small businesses and nonprofits attract top talent without financial resources of a larger corporation?
Recruiting is most definitely expensive. It's a $2 billion industry. So I would encourage companies to, first of all, have a LinkedIn page, a business page, even if you only have 2 employees or 3 employees, create a business page for your organization. It's free on LinkedIn and it shows you are able to build and grow a presence on LinkedIn. And so that way people can go to your LinkedIn business page. And I would encourage you to have content at least weekly. And then when you have openings in your recruiting, you already have an engaged audience, but you have to be consistent and you have to put the content out there. And I know a lot of companies are like, well, what do I need to say in this content? And you can write and talk about what your company is actively doing or how you're growing or highlight an employee and give them a shout out, or talk about a community event that your organization is participating in. There's lots of different things you can talk about to build a following and an engaged presence on LinkedIn. And that way, when you have those positions open up, individuals are already watching your company and your content.
Now, do you realize that a lot of the smaller companies that you've worked with, do you realize that they have a LinkedIn? Has that been a trend, or a lot of them are not on LinkedIn right now?
They are on LinkedIn, but their profiles for their company is not optimized. And they can fix that by updating a logo, putting a banner up there, providing ways to make the page more attractive, and
Mhm.
updated because you don't want to go to a company's LinkedIn page and say, oh, well, they don't really have much going on. When actually
Mhm.
maybe they do, they're just not communicating it that way through the content.
Good tip. And what about Twitter? Should they do the same thing with Twitter and all the other social media platforms?
I say yes. And if you can make all of the content the same as you drip it out,
Mhm.
that is will create more company branding for your organization.
These techniques help with visibility and branding. And if someone is aware of a job, they can get to see what the organization is all about. But how do you make sure that you get the traction, the traffic to your site? So, does that take time?
It does take time, but it's worth it. The
Mm,
outreach piece, if you can build awareness and create visibility online, when you have those positions or you decide to grow or you need to replace somebody or you have a sudden opening because someone suddenly resigned, you can start doing post about your position and what you need. And so people will see that and come to you with interest. You can also go to outreach and do direct outreach to candidates on LinkedIn. Even if you have the free account, you can do that. I think it's limited to 10 or 20 messages a week, but
Right.
you can always upgrade to premium. I think it's $30 a month, and then get more opportunity to message people directly and do outreach that way. And that way you're not paying for an expensive job posting that you might get, 95% of the applicants are not even qualified. That's a huge waste of money. And then the recruiting fees, those add up very quickly.
And what do you say about, do you have to necessarily wait till there's an opening? Or is there any like passive ways of doing recruitment where you're doing it, it's an ongoing thing? And when the opening does open up, you have a pipeline of people that may be interested?
Yes, I'm glad that you asked this. You can definitely track candidates as they come across your desk, or maybe you don't have an opening now and they contact you, or you contact them, you come in connection either way. And if you don't have a fancy applicant tracking system, that's okay. You can just have an Excel spreadsheet or put it in a folder in your email. And once the opportunity does come up and you are ready to hire for that person, you already have a pipeline of passive candidates.
Right. Right. That's a good tip because for smaller organizations that don't have a huge budget, this is sort of like a long-term strategy, right? So to that point, for smaller organizations with a limited HR resource, how can they streamline their recruitment process to be more efficient, including what you just mentioned, coming up with, the LinkedIn page and keeping it populated with content takes time. Any strategies on how a smaller organization or maybe even a nonprofit can streamline this process?
Yes, and I'm so glad you asked this because I talk about this in a lot of my LinkedIn content, because a lot of, from what I see it as a recruiter, a lot of companies will say they need to hire someone ASAP, but then the hiring process and recruiting process will be clunky. So how can we fix that? Streamline the interview process. So once you have candidates come in, and you don't need to wait till you have a full slate of candidates, you can start by interviewing one or two. As they come in, go ahead and put them through the process and have the same process for the same position. So what I mean by that is, let's say we're hiring an entry-level person in admin, doing a phone interview with them and then having them come on site to meet with the team, or doing a Zoom. That's an appropriate amount of interviews. You don't need to interview an entry-level person or a support person 4 and 5 times. You 2 times, maybe 3 at the absolute most is plenty appropriate. For the mid-level, I would say, 3, max 4. And then for executive and senior level, 4, absolute max 5. And that would include a relocation and a spouse coming to the town or area and going to dinner with the executive team. So I see a lot of companies, they'll have a position and they'll have excessive interview rounds. And interview fatigue is a real thing. And a lot of the candidates, the top talent candidates, if they get tired of the interview process or they think it's getting excessive, they'll just remove themselves from consideration.
I definitely know that, there is interview fatigue. I realize another thing that adds to the interview fatigue, I think, is the homework. I call it homework. How do you test for skills and ability? So there are different interview practices that you can use, but sometimes people test you. What are your thoughts on the most effective ways to test an applicant to make sure that they are who they say they are in terms of their abilities?
I think it's best to ask situational based questions. So have them talk out with you the exact same way that they've handled XYZ problem. And if they haven't done it, they won't be able to articulate it.
Okay. So you really are a fan of how you're interviewing questions opposed to actually giving a test or a
Yes.
homework, a project.
I think projects are appropriate. Let's say you're interviewing for a copywriting person or a marketing person, having them write copy for you as an example would be appropriate. But going in and doing like Excel assessments or all these personality assessments, I'm not a huge fan of those. Because, or, you could have somebody write up a pivot table or something like that for you, as an example. But a lot of times they can just talk it out, like how they would actually do it, and that suffices.
Now, I know you mentioned that you also interview for C-suite. A trend that I've been seeing in my network, for those who are interviewing for suite positions, is they also are getting homework as well. They'll get a presentation topic that they need to present at maybe the third, fourth, or fifth interview, or a case study that they need to talk to. Are you familiar with those type of strategies?
Yes, I actually placed the CEO last year and we had him write up a presentation of his first 30, 60, and 90 days. And he
Yeah.
presented that to the executive team and the board. And that gave him an opportunity to actually map out his plan. So there was no right or wrong answer there, but it was a way for him to articulate exactly what type of strategies he was going to come in and implement and execute.
So I've heard from those that are in the position, the actual candidates, some people sometimes say, is this opportunity and this project a way of you getting my information, my intellectual capital for free? What are your thoughts on that? And so even if I was not hired, you're taking my ideas and perhaps leveraging them after the interview's all over.
I understand that standpoint or mindset, but also there's some things you have to give for free if you're going to get. And just being willing to, you don't want anyone ever to steal your work or to copy your IP. Um, but finding a way to provide that to them and what they're asking for, but then also not give away the farm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a fine balance, right?
It is, yes.
With the rise of the gig economy, how do you see the traditional employer-employee relationship evolving, especially for the smaller organizations?
I think it's not going anywhere, the gig economy. So I think the more that employers can be open-minded to their employees having multiple streams of income, as long as they're getting the work done for you and completing their task, then who cares what they're doing with the rest of their time or if they want to be, an Instagram influencer or on TikTok making videos, making money, that's okay as long as they're doing a good job for you.
Now, I personally love that response, but is that actually how the employers are looking at it these days? What's the trend? Are they for or against those who have gigs?
I think if you work for a progressive employer, they are open-minded to it. The reason being is it's really hard to control. You can't control your employees. And employees don't want to be controlled. And again, if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and completing what they need to for you, who cares?
Can you kindly let the audience know how they can follow your work and your services?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn at Caroline Pennington. And then I also have a newsletter. If you go to www.howtohiretoptalent.com, I have a weekly newsletter that comes out every Tuesday that drops all the tips and tricks to how to hire top talent.
Thank you so much for stopping by, Caroline.
Thank you.